Okay, so today we're talking about the 1963 film The Haunting, a 60s horror movie that kind of paved the way for some horror movies. I know some modern horror directors have drawn inspiration from this film. Most notably, I heard that Sam Raimi took inspiration from this movie, and you can definitely see it comparing it to like Evil Dead with a lot of the shots in this film compared to that, and just like some of just like the general themes and atmosphere. But it was directed by Robert Wise, who I didn't know until a week ago is an absolute legend. Like, this is an insane lineup. Sound of Music, West Side Story, The Haunting, Star Trek, Day the Earth Stood Still, one of my favorite sci-fi movies, The Andromeda Strain, The Setup, I've heard that before, The Body Snatcher, and then, a bunch of other stuff down here. I've heard of Born to Kill before. The Curse of the Cat People? Dude, this guy has, like, this top six is, like, that's amazing. And so, yeah. I've only seen two of them, unfortunately. I've only seen The Day the Earth Stood Still and The Haunting. But I am very much interested in seeing The Andromeda Strain shortly. But yeah, so we're talking about The Haunting today. And, oh man, it was really great. It was awesome and a bit ahead of its time, because when I think of old horror movies, maybe like 60s and before, sometimes you can think of like, cheesiness, some of the scares and some of the reactions feel unnatural, but not like supernatural in a good way. Some of the scares are like a bit obvious and forced, because watching this trailer, it's like, oh, scream if you have to. You won't believe the terror you're about to watch. But if somebody made this movie now, which, I mean, there's been plenty of remakes and adaptations of The Haunting of Hill House, then if they made this exact movie, they would probably realize that it is more psychological. And for the 60s, I think that was ahead of its time, because, it was a fun ride getting to know everybody and like the middle stuff with like the random stuff happening in the house. But I think what really like sold the movie to me was what happens to Eleanor near the end and Julie Harris's performance. Like, that part at the end, the last maybe like 20 minutes, really is what cemented this as like a classic horror movie in my eyes. So, I mean, first of all, without spoiling anything, it is an adaptation of The Haunting of Hill House, which has been adapted to a million times. I know there's a remake of this movie with Liam Neeson. There is a series, The Haunting of Hill House, and there might have even been another movie. I don't know. But I also have the board game, The Haunting of Hill House. I forget if that's the exact title, but it's a very fun board game. Very, very fun. But you've probably heard the story. It's a cast of characters, a few different characters going to this house that is supposedly haunted. And our main character, I would say, is Julie Harris. Even though the movie doesn't start on her, it starts with Richard Johnson as Dr. Markway. And he is collecting a team of just subjects, really, his lab rats, who are going to go into this house on Hill House, and they're going to try to, figure stuff out. I think he said, we need to find the door, the key to another world. And, yeah, okay. But we have these cast of characters, and they're brought in because they're deemed to have some interaction with the supernatural. Eleanor supposedly had an interaction with something supernatural when she was younger, something that she couldn't explain. I think there were like stones thrown at her house or something, and like just something supernatural. I forget exactly. Oh man, I watched this not too long ago. I should remember. And then we have Claire Bloom's character, Theo, and she is supposed to be like a mind reader. We first get to meet her at like this dinner scene, and she's like reading Julie Harris's mind, and she like saying things that she wouldn't know. And that's not really brought back too much. I think, honestly, I was praising the psychological aspects of Eleanor's character near the end of what happens with her. But if they even went further and had Theo maybe like use her mind reading to kind of like connect, either empathize or identify what was happening with Eleanor's character, I think that could have added even another layer there. That would have been awesome to see. But it really didn't go anywhere for her character, but still, they were all great characters. And of course, Richard Johnson as Dr. Markway, he was he's just like classic 60s charismatic actor. He was going to be, or he was one of the runner-ups, I believe, for the role of James Bond when Sean Connery got it instead of him. And he didn't get it. But like looking at him, it's like he is very much reminiscent of Sean Connery, James Bond, the mustache, the kind of just like stoic, charismatic, booming voice. Man, he's just classic screen presence. He was awesome. And then we have Russ Tamblyn, who is set to inherit the house, and he kind of doesn't believe in anything. And he just goes around, I think he must have been Owen Wilson's character in the remake. He kind of goes around and he just, hangs out a bit, and then, eventually just gets caught into everything. He doesn't really have much of an arc himself, but, he was there. He was good. Russ Tamblyn, living legend. He was in West Side Story, was in Twin Peaks, loved him in Twin Peaks. But yeah, we have a really great cast of characters. They're a lot of fun, good differences between them. And then we go into the house. And I think following Eleanor to the house and viewing her as the protagonist worked really well. Because, yeah, she's a character who, on the surface, she seems just like a put together, well, I guess what's happening in the movie. But like she presents herself, trying to present herself as put together. But then we see from the beginning scene that she is living on her sister's couch. She owns half of the car, so she has to beg them to like take it and do this. This is like the one thing she wants to achieve in her life. She wants to go and be a part of this experiment. And then, yeah, she gets there, and her character along the way is just like, I don't want to say a wreck. I don't want to say she's a wreck, but she's very paranoid. And she gets very scared. And that's putting it very simply, but like she gets very scared and enthralled by this mystery. And it almost leads you to wonder if she wanted to be like possessed, to put it harshly. I think, before I go full on spoilers, I'll say that I think that this movie, the atmosphere was awesome. Apparently they shot it in black and white when they had the option of shooting it in color, which was starting to be the mainstay at the time. They shot it in black and white on purpose, and I think it really benefited from that. Yeah, the cinematography was great. Some of the suspenseful moments of just like random noises, doorknobs. There's a scene with this doorway kind of like going in and out, like concave, convex, and just like, yeah, that stuff was really cool. And oh man, it's just such a great horror movie from the 60s that's not necessarily scary, but like I said, the psychological aspects were really ahead of its time. And I think the ending is very, very satisfying. And going into the lore, so I didn't even mention the lore, which was said near the beginning. The lore of the actual house. The house is pretty much a character in itself. Like the very first scene is a montage of the previous owners. And so you have the previous owner, Hugh Crane. That's a funny name, just Hugh Crane. So Hugh Crane was the original owner, I believe, and then as his first wife was driving to get to Hill House, she crashed and died in her carriage. And then his second wife in Hill House, she fell down the stairs and died. And then after that, Hugh Crane's daughter inherited the house, and she grew old in the house with a very interesting dissolve to her being young to old. Like, most of the effects were good. That one, a little questionable. And so now that she's living in the house, she had hired a caretaker. And then the caretaker usually was by her side at all the times whenever she called for her. But one time she was calling for her, but she was too busy fooling around with a man and didn't hear her, and she died. So the daughter is now to the question. And then the caretaker inherited the house. And then after the caretaker inherited the house, I think she was the one who hung herself at the top of the stairs. The spiral stairs, just iconic, looked great. I love that shot of her walking up the stairs with a platter, and there's just a rope on the platter. And then she died. And then that's kind of like the history of it. And, oh man, the history of it was so interesting. And then leading into what's actually happening, and like having that history, and having the title of The Haunting, just alluding to there's ghosts haunting the house. It's a haunted house movie, like the definitive haunted house movie. And the things that are not said and shown, I think, make this movie great, as well as the psychological aspects, like I was saying. Because The things that aren't said or shown are what is doing the haunting, really. The way that the movie leaves it up to the audience to decide what is haunting this house, what is their motivation, who is haunting the house. Did these previous cast of characters who died, like those multiple characters that died in the house and around the house, do they have any motivations? And then we have this scene right here, actually, which a scene that I really liked in this banner here, when they're looking at these statues. Does that have anything to do with it? Are these statues, like, are they being watched? Because I know there was a line in the movie where they're like, oh, I feel like I'm being watched. There's a lot of questions, and that's where the horror comes from, because it's not really jump scary. There's one minor jump scare, which is kind of funny. I kind of laughed at it, but maybe I was just laughing because it was like, I wasn't expecting it. Like, maybe it did scare. Maybe it did scare. Maybe it did. Maybe. I'm not saying it did, but maybe it did. But that was a great jump scare. But yeah, a lot of good tension. Robert Wise directed this superbly, and yeah, just great movie overall. Loved it. So, full-on spoilers. Full-on spoilers. Where did I want to start off here? I wanted to start off about Eleanor's character and her psychological state. Because like I was saying, she goes into the house, and we see that she really doesn't have a lot going for her. She's living on her sister's couch, needs to borrow the car, yada, yada. So she wants to find some purpose in this trip. And there's this backstory of her encountering something supernatural when she was younger, but then at some point she denies it. She's really on the fence about it. And so she comes to this house. She seems like she wants something to happen to her. Like, that scene on the balcony was really interesting. And there's that one shot that we have. It was like the outside of the house, and it's just a shot from the sky coming down on her, crashing down on her, making her bend over the railing, almost falling off. But still, there was nothing there. There was nobody there. Nobody physically there. Why did that happen? Who knows? And that's, again, why this movie is great. There's no answer to that specifically. And then we have that whole romance subplot, kind of, with her and Dr. Markway, which was like, okay. I think he mentioned to the audience at the beginning that he had a wife and that she didn't really approve of it. And then later on, it came as a surprise to Eleanor that he had a wife when she came. And honestly, when that happened, I forgot that he mentioned it earlier. I think he mentioned it earlier. I'm pretty sure. But yeah, so I was also saying earlier that I think Theo, her mind-reading abilities, her telepathy, should have been played up more near the end, when she maybe should analyze Eleanor's mental state, try to figure out what's going on there, try to see what she wants. Because at the end of the movie, the only one to die is Eleanor. And she dies because she wants to be a part of the house. Multiple times they try to kick her out. She's going crazy, she's seeing things. She's almost falling off balconies. For her safety, they wanted her to leave. She gets in the car near the end, drives off, drives into a tree because she saw Mrs. Markway just strolling the forest, which is a weird plot point there. I feel like there's more to that than I really understand. But so, and she dies, and then there's a line at the end where it's like, at least she's now a part of the house. And maybe it can be seen as she has heard these stories. Again, she wants to be a part of something. And she truly believes in the haunting. And so in her eyes, her dying, she's just going to join this community of ghosts. This community of people who are haunting Hill House now. And that's what she always wanted. And her physical self doesn't really want to tell herself that. She's like, okay, maybe I do want to die, but, don't really want to die because no human wants to die. Self-preservation. But then in the end, she does because she wants to be a part of that community. And that's just a theory I just made off the top of my head. I don't know. Could be right, could be wrong, whatever. But also, I was just mentioning Mrs. Markway. The one jump scare I was talking about was after a fantastic scene on the spiral staircase. A rickety spiral blah, blah, blah. A rickety spiral staircase, hinges coming out of the walls. She's climbing up the staircase. Everybody's like, no, don't go up there. Great scene, great tension. She gets to the top. Dr. Markway is coming up as well. His weight, making it teeter even more. And then she gets to the top, and there's a jump scare from Mrs. Markway. Because previously, Mrs. Markway, she stayed in that old nursery room. But then they go in. She's missing. She appears there. And then she appears outdoors. She appears when the crash happens. And that's the one part where I'm like, what? Her plot point, her character. What is her influence? Why did that happen to her? And nobody else. She was the one who thoroughly did not believe in any of the ghosts. She was confident going in. Maybe because she had that confidence, the ghosts targeted her, made her go crazy. Did these ghosts have abilities to like get into people's minds, make them do things they wouldn't? Maybe just confuse them? Because during the middle of the movie, during the meat of the movie, it's just like, creaky noises, writing on the wall, doors being slammed, which was a fun introduction on it. It's become a cliche, but like doors being slammed was a good introduction where it's like, it's just just the wind. The house was built on a slant, guys. Trust me. Then we have like the cold spot, which is a cool, like, non-visual. I guess there was like a breath at one point, but mainly non-visual way of a chilling theme there. But it did a good job at building up these like physical things that are happening to them. There's classic horror movie tropes of physical thing, like physical danger being the thing at the beginning of the movie, and then near the end of the movie, psychological danger becomes more relevant, which was great choice on their part. Worked out really, really well. And yeah, that evolution kind of makes you question what these ghosts have the ability to do. And it's still not clear, but hey, I love the journey. Do I have anything else to say? Any notable scenes, really? I mean, yeah, getting the introductory montage was great, of the history of Hill House, and then getting to know the characters was a lot of fun. Eleanor and Theo, their relationship was fun. They get mad very easily. I feel like that's like an old movie thing where it's like somebody says something small and it strikes a nerve. And the screenwriter's interpretation was that Eleanor is actually a patient in a mental asylum and it's all happening in her cell. Interesting. Okay. Looking at it that way, at the beginning, like, does the asylum start when she's at her family's, her sister's? Okay, let's just disregard that. Pretend that sister scene didn't happen. Right at Hill House, she gets to Hill House. If we're thinking about it along the lines of an asylum, Dr. Markway makes sense. Doctor, maybe he's a doctor. We have Eleanor, a mind reader, maybe like a therapist. Then we have Russ Tamblin's character. What's his name again? Luke Sanderson. We have Luke Sanderson's character. Don't know what he could be, really. Just maybe another patient. Most of the horror comes with her thinking that she's hearing things. One of the ones that I can think off the top of my head is her and Theo. They're in the bedroom, and then they hear something behind the door. Oh, what's happening? And then they open the door, and it's just Markway and Luke just walking in the halls. Maybe it's an asylum. They're just like on duty. They're just walking around, and they're like, oh, what's happening? Oh, you're going crazy? Cool. Discusses it a bit on Wikipedia. Let us see here. As Gidding crafted the screenplay, he came to believe that the novel was not a ghost story at all, but rather a compilation of the insane thoughts of the lead character, Eleanor Vance. He theorized that Vance was having a nervous breakdown, envisioning a scenario which Hill House is the hospital she is held. Markway is her psychiatrist. The cold banging and violence are the results of shock treatment, and the opening and closing of doors reflected the opening and closing of hospital doors. Wise and Gidding traveled to Bennington, Vermont to meet Jackson, who told them it was a good idea, but that the novel was definitely about the supernatural. Nonetheless, elements of this insanity concept remained in the script so that the audience was left wondering whether the supernatural events in the film were Eleanor's mind or if they were real. It was also during their visit to speak with Jackson that Wise and Gidding chose the title for their film. They did not want to keep the book title. They asked Jackson if she had considered an alternate title. She suggested The Haunting, which they immediately adopted. Yeah, shock treatment. I really love the way that it came to be. They had this idea of this asylum, but they went to see the writer of the book, and the writer was like, no, it's about the supernatural. Like, come on, please. But then they incorporated both of the ideas, and yeah, that's great. Respect. I love when writers just do their job. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I just love like those little pre-production tidbits where it's like a writer did this specifically, that just you can see after the movie is made why that was a good decision. One of my favorite examples is in Annihilation. Was that Alex Garland? In Annihilation, he wrote the screenplay based on the memory of reading the novel rather than adapting it directly. So maybe he read it, like 5-10 years ago. And then the core elements of it are probably just going to stick out in his head, and he can interpret those any way he wants. And I think that was just a really cool way of making that screenplay and that movie. And I love both of those pieces of work individually, the book and the movie. They're both incredible. And yeah, that worked out really well. And I'm sure the original Haunting of Hill House is great. It's a classic for a reason. It's been adapted a million times for a reason. It's a staple. And I think this does it justice in a slightly different way. And again, like I said, the psychological aspects are why I liked it so much, why it felt more ahead of its time. And that transition from physical horror to psychological horror, making you question what's going on, it worked really well. Worked really, really well. So yeah, I really love The Haunting. Robert Wise is great.